talk about the hypnagogic mind. Why is it so important? Emil QA hit the nail on the head that we say affirmations as we're falling off to sleep.
Yes. Hypnagogia is a state that we all naturally enter 2 times a day, just before we're drifting off to sleep at night and just as we're coming to in the morning. It's an exquisitely, very pleasurable, relaxed state in which the body is immobile. The body may even be slightly paralytic, but we have cognition. We have control over our attention. The mind sort of morphs and bends like the images in a Salvador Dali painting, but we're able to direct our attention. And sleep researchers, psychical researchers, neuroscience researchers have found that this is prime time, in effect, for self-suggestibility because our rational barriers are down. One of the problems with affirmations is if you say, I am confident, you may be running into the rational apparatus of the mind, which tells you, no, you're not confident, you're a nervous wreck. And then the mantra doesn't do you any good. That's why people are always making fun of affirmations, because they seem so neutered, they seem so weak in the face of our actual assumptions or prejudices about ourselves. However, in the state of hypnagogia, it seems that our rational defenses are down. So using a mantra like I am confident can become much stronger, much more potent. It has a more direct path to the processes of the subconscious mind. The rational apparatus is lowered. This is also why these late night hours, these wee morning hours, when we hover between sleepfulness and wakefulness, can also be times of great anxiety. People who suffer from depression or grief or anxiety will often describe, for example, the wee hours of the morning, the early morning hours, as the most difficult time of day. And I believe it's for the exact same reason. Our rational defenses are down. So something that may be just the size of a little gremlin suddenly seems like the size of a dragon. We worry about things that are going to happen at work the next day, at school the next day. And very often the next day rolls around and we go about our business and we find it wasn't so bad. It was no big deal. But the gremlins of the mind can take on a titanic proportion during the state of hypnagogia. And that can be difficult. But it can also be used by us. It can be used by us because the rational defenses are down. It's prime time for conscious autosuggestion or the use of mantras. Coué understood that. He had an early instinct for that, and this was later validated by clinical researchers.
Let's see if I can sew this together. That was brilliant. So first off, we're talking about the gremlins in the mind. Like, for instance, I woke up this morning and I felt like, and it's a theme that is in my life ever since childhood. It's in my parents' lives. I think it's in their parents' lives. The idea that I'd messed something up. I woke up from a dream feeling like I'd messed something up. We can actually flip that on its head. You actually,
absolutely.
It's fascinating that you mentioned, I'm not sure if it was conscious or unconscious, you mentioned Salvador Dali painting, which he does in a hypnagogic state. We can take in the morning, this is what my biggest concern is, and then flip it on its head and feed it back in as a positive affirmations in the hypnagogic state before we sleep, or put ourselves almost back to sleep in the morning and begin to reprogram it.
Yes, exactly. The important thing to remember about this hypnagogic state, these few moments before you fall asleep, these few moments just as you're waking up, is that, again, that aspect of your mind that measures, that evaluates things proportionally, is relaxed, is down. That's why you sort of see dream images or can hear ideas, and they seem very real. But you still have cognition. So you can actually use that time of day, which we all enter naturally twice over a 24-hour period. You can use that time of day to introduce mantras or suggestions or affirmations to yourself. It's very powerful.
I want to dive more into that and some of the pioneers in that. But before I do that, there's a concept I have, which is the Shawshank Redemption syndrome. And what that says is that if you are doing affirmations with the conscious mind, it's going to take you 36 years plus with a spoon against a wall or a tiny little, what did he use? A tiny little mineral axe against the wall to dive through the tunnel through to get somewhere. Or you can do these affirmations and similar tools in this hypnagogic state and instead turn the key and walk right through.
Yes. And I would advise doing both. Do both. You can use this hypnagogic state, which I do. I mean, I virtually never go to sleep at night without repeating some sort of affirmation or adopting some sort of visualization. That is a daily practice, and it's all but effortless. And at the same time, you can also use the repetition method. There was a student of Coué's named Leslie Weatherhead, and he talked about the problem of the rational mind serving almost as kind of a traffic cop who keeps the idealized affirmation from getting past the rational apparatus. He said, look, there's two ways to do it. You can use Coué's method, or you can just incessantly repeat things like that to yourself. And you know what? Through incessant repetition, sometimes someone will get past the traffic cop. It will happen. My contention is you can do both. You can do both. Throw everything at it, but understand that you have this very powerful choice, and it's all but effortless. I use it every day.
Awesome. Well, let's talk about some of the science behind it. Let's talk about scientist Charles Hunterton and the Gasfeld experiments.
Yes. Hunterton was a remarkable man. Charles Hunterton was a psychical researcher. I think one of the greatest psychical researchers the 20th century produced. He died very young. He died at about the age of 42 in the mid-1990s. He had suffered from ill health much of his life, but he pioneered with some collaborators an extraordinary group of psychical experiments called the Ganzfeld experiments. Ganzfeld is German for whole field or open field. And what Hunterton discovered was that if you place a person in a state of comfortable sensory deprivation, in other words, you sort of induce this hypnagogic state, you can heighten instances of psychical activity or the anomalous transfer of information. If you place somebody, let's say, in an isolation tank, and you give them white noise earphones, comfortable eye coverings. I've been in one of these Ganzfeld isolation tanks. It's extremely restful. It's extremely otherworldly. It's very, very relaxing. You are seated usually in an easy chair, and from a sensory perspective, you're completely cut off. And it's enormously peaceful. It can almost be a little unsettling at first, but very quickly you settle into a state of intense relaxation. So if you can kind of block out the routine noise that's part of our lives, Hunterton found, there seems to be a spike in instances of the individual displaying anomalous abilities to exchange or transfer information. And what's significant about his experiments is they were subject to a unique degree of scrutiny by one of the primary skeptics of ESP research, a man named Ray Hyman, who's a research psychologist emeritus at the University of Oregon. And shortly before Hunterton's death, Hunterton and Hyman, the psychical researcher and the psychical skeptic, co-authored a paper. And in this paper, Hyman validated the validity of Hunterton's data. He also said that he did not believe in the psychical research thesis, but that the data itself is unpolluted and that it warrants further questioning. There is virtually not a single academic, journalist, or skeptic of psychical research who has read that paper. And they will not read that paper, no matter how many times I cite it, no matter how easy I make it for them. Because that paper, apropos of what we were describing earlier, upends an easy conventional orthodoxy. It does not validate the existence of psychical abilities. It validates the data from Charles Hunterton's experiments, which Hunterton hypothesized as being evidence of psychical or telepathic abilities. Hyman rejected that hypothesis, but affirmed that the data was unpolluted and more research was warranted. You see how close we are, how thin the tissue is separating the responsible psychical researcher and the responsible skeptic. They're that close. They have different conclusions, but both agree that further study is warranted. That was a generation ago. It has never been repeated, and we're stuck in this artificial stalemate simply because people want to cleave to flags and banners and slogans and not really study.
It's interesting. Thank you for sharing on that. I completely didn't expect to bring up quantum science today, but
Why not?
why not?
Kind of day.
You know,
It's a Thursday. All bets are off.
Andy said Mercury's in retrograde, so there you go.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
So quantum mechanics, quantum physics, the observer affects the outcome. That alone says it all. There's something more than meets the eye. Period. Done deal.
We live in a much stranger world than what we were educated to understand growing up. And, quantum theorizing, I think, has placed our generation in front of a question that is profound and as deep as Victorians faced with the advent of Darwinism. What is human nature? Who are we? Einstein has already long since demonstrated that time is relative, that somebody moving at or near light speed experiences an effective slowdown of time apropos of us here on Earth. And quantum theorizing has demonstrated that subatomic particles occupy an infinitude of positions and are only localized, collapse from a wave state, so to speak, to a localized state when a sentient observer chooses to take a measurement. These are really big ideas. These are as big as Newtonian physics. These are as big as time-space relativity. These are as big as evolution. These ideas, like it or not, are going to upend our understanding of what it means to be human.
So let's go from there. Let's talk about how we can practice subconscious mind training. And we could do it with day by day in every way. I'm getting better and better.
I think, first of all, we are, and I write about this in the Miracle Club, it's very possible that we are constantly engaged in an act of selection, basically, in terms of our assumptions, our mental pictures, our emotionalized thoughts. Look, most of the time we function as five sensory beings. Let's leave aside the psychical thesis for a moment. Day in and day out, let's say we're functioning with these tools that we're familiar with of the five senses. How are those tools necessarily different from the tools of measurement that the quantum theorist is using in the lab, or for that matter, that the biologist is using in his or her work? They're more coarse, they're less exact, but they are tools of measurement, biologic to be sure, but they're tools of measurement. It's entirely possible that amid all this talk of the infinitude of objects, the disruption of the linear model of time, the relativity of space-time, it's entirely possible that in the same way that Emile Coué was correct in his instincts about autosuggestion, all of the mind metaphysics pioneers, Neville Goddard, Ernest Holmes, Florence Scovel Shinn, were correct in their instincts, and it's now only 80 or 100 years hence that some of what they said is beginning to get validated. And the individual can relate to that by considering whether his or her own mind, psyche, five senses are instruments of measurement that can select things, that can localize things, that can choose from among an infinitude of possibilities, not just on the motor cognitive scale, but on some much larger scale in which we live. And my wish is for all of us to experiment with that. That's really what the Miracle Club is about.
Beautiful. So if we take day by day in every way, I'm getting better and better. Repeat this as we go to sleep. How much should we do this? Is there a state that we want to be in?
Well, Coué suggested repeating it 20 times. He felt that was sufficient, and he recommended that to aid you in repeating this mantra 20 times, you should create a string with 20 knots in it. Yeah, all right. And count it off as if you're using a rosary or prayer beads. The reason for that is he didn't want anybody to rouse themselves out of the hypnagogic state, rouse themselves to wakefulness, because they're asking, wait, was that 17 or was that 18? So use your string. Now, you can also create your own mantras. You don't have to use day by day in every way, I'm getting better and better. You can, but you can also create your own mantras. Coué felt that mantra covered the bases, and he felt that was a good way to begin. So you could experiment with that for a few weeks, see how it goes, and then create your own mantra. But you don't have to do it much. And again, you can very naturally, easily do it twice a day when you're in this state of hypnagogia.
Thank you. And there's another one that I love. If you've got pain or depression, it passes.
Yes, that was another one of Coué's expressions. So simple. It passes. It passes. And I write about him using that with a man in Chicago. And again, Coué kept his mantras very simple because he didn't want the mind to be overly aroused. He didn't want to arouse the individual from this state of self-hypnosis, essentially. So he kept everything very simple.
Excellent, excellent. On that note, speaking of simple, where can people go to find One Simple Idea, to find all your books, and to find out more?
Oh, well, One Simple Idea, which is my history of positive thinking, is on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, anywhere books are sold. And that book is really close to my heart. Of all the books I've written, I would say One Simple Idea is my personal favorite. I write in there quite a bit about Emile Coué and some of the other figures that we've been talking about. I really get into the nitty-gritty of their careers, but also their ideas, how they came to them, and how they're usable. We're not supposed to play favorites, but on One Simple Idea,
they're all your babies.
All my books, yeah, they're all my babies. But that one has a special place in my heart. Yeah,
very cool. And then will we send people to MITCHHOROWITZ.com and
MITCHHOROWITZ.com. I'm on Twitter at Mitch Horowitz. I'm on Facebook, and if people want to know where I'm speaking or what I'm up to, I don't bombard you with emails. In fact, I never keep anybody's emails. I'm terrible with it. There's a marketing director out there somewhere, who's pulling his hair out over me, but that's the way I am. But I do remain active on social media, and I'm super easy to find and to reach. So follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and you'll find out everything I'm up to.
And if I know anything about you, you love getting emails from people and hearing what people are thinking.
That's right. I love when people email me with questions or observations or ideas. I do ask them to remember that, as Shakespeare said, brevity is the soul of wit. There's only so many I can get through, but I do answer everybody who writes to me. And I love hearing, in particular, from Inspired Nation listeners, because I say this to you in private. I don't mind saying it in public. I hear from a lot of people who come into contact with me through a lot of different media, but unfailingly, your viewers and listeners at Inspire Nation ask me the most poignant, determined, intelligent, informed, motivated questions of any that I get. So I always love hearing.
I just had an amazing time talking with Mitch Horowitz. To see more videos on how thoughts become things, click here, subscribe below.